Welcome, wonderful people from around the world. Before we start, I want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Ekaterina, co-founder of Future London Academy, and I will be your host today. And as you probably know, today we have a special guest as part of our Creative Legends series. We've got a creative legend, the one and only, the wonderful, the fantastic, the inspiring Maria Giudice. That, I mean, you've heard, I don't think Maria actually needs introduction, but let me give you a few facts that you probably know about her. Apart from her being an incredible design leader for over 30 years in the industry, she has seen it all sorts of cycles of design industry, everything that happened in Silicon Valley, in product world, in design world. She has seen it all. She founded one of the pioneering design and experience agencies called Hot Studio that was acquired famously by Facebook in 2013, which was named the acquisition of a century because it was such a wild idea that a tech company will acquire a design studio that hasn't been heard of before. So that was really unique. And now Marie is a coach. And what I love about the fact that we are talking to Maria today is that Maria obviously had all of this perspective of actually being in the middle of change and doing change, creating change, leading people, whether it was at Hot Studio, whether it was at Facebook, whether it was at Autodesk, where she became VP of design later. And now she had time to reflect back on it, and through her coaching experience can guide all of us how to be better leaders. So she has both the practical and very much in the industry insight, but also very reflective part of what maybe we should all do better and what can we do to the people and how can we be better leaders. So welcome, Maria. I'm so glad that you are here. How are you doing?
Good. I love your enthusiasm.
It's true enthusiasm.
I feel like you need pom-poms. Yeah. We both need pom-poms.
We could do a bit of a dance. I feel like this conversation will be so special for many reasons. First of all, every time I speak to Maria, she has so much wisdom and insight and just energizes every single person I know. But also there is so much to discuss in terms of the state of the industry that we are in right now. There are so many news happening in the design world. So I feel like it will be very interesting to talk to someone who has seen it all and has seen this happening many times before. And hopefully we'll find some peace and some wisdom in terms of how we should approach what we see and how can we be better leaders, but also use this context of the industry to be our best selves. On that note, Maria, before we jump into all philosophical and deep questions, I have 10 rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready?
Okay, am I ready? I guess I am. Let's go for it.
Describe yourself in 3 words.
Irreverent, kind, and compassionate.
Book that changed your mind on something recently.
I would say that this book called Managing Transitions was an incredible book that really helped give me perspective about change.
Great, need to check that out. 3 apps you use the most every day.
Facebook, LinkedIn, and email.
Agency life or in-house team?
Both.
What motivates you more? Radical, step change innovation, or incremental?
Totally radical. I'm all about going for it.
Love it. Designer or artist you admire right now?
Well, I always like to say John Maeda is sort of like my spirit animal. And I think of him as a designer artist.
Well, so convenient. We actually just interviewed him last week, so everyone will be able to hear the interview with him very soon. So that's nice continuation. He is wonderful. He is truly wonderful human. What is your guilty pleasure?
Eggplant parmesan and cannolis.
That sounds so good. Oh my God, you said it and now I'm hungry.
It's the food that I want to eat on my deathbed.
No, seriously, this sounds delicious.
I think I'm going to write it in my will.
New York or Silicon Valley?
New York all the way.
What's the best part about working in design or design leadership?
Knowing that the way we look at the world can greatly benefit humanity when used the right way.
This is such a great way to start on the interview. So thank you so much, Maria. We're done with rapid fire questions. Now we can relax, sit down, and talk about
Okay. All right.
lots of interesting topics. But you actually said something that very nicely links us to everything else we wanted to discuss on the topic of design leadership. You've been advocating for design leadership for a very long time. You wrote a book about the rise of the DEO, Design Executive Officer, and I think now there are a lot of conversations of should designers be at the C-level, should there be a chief design officer, chief creative officer, whatever companies want to call it. What is the place of designers there? I would love to hear your thoughts. First of all, should designers be at the C-level? Do you still agree? Have you changed your mind? And also, what might be stopping, since you've written it 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Why do you think we're still not there? What is stopping designers from being at the C-level?
I wouldn't say that we're not there. I mean, when I wrote Rise of the DO in 2013. 2013 the book came out. So that's more than 10 years ago. And back then that was a really radical idea. When that if people can tap into the qualities and skills and traits that designers inherently have, that they can be incredible leaders at the top of any organization. I still firmly believe in that more than ever before. With the kinds of problems that we have facing us in the world today, we're going to need more and more creativity and new ways of thinking. And that's what designers inherently know how to do. And everybody's born creative. So when I say designers, I am provocatively poking people to lean into those qualities and traits that they can have or build to lead people through change using these incredible superpowers. So I think that those powers are even more important now than ever before. And a lot of people are, and there have been waves of where designers were like welcome at the table, when time, and then there are waves when designers are not welcome at the table. That is what life is all about. It's very typical for businesses to move at snail level paces. In order to have a design leader, you really need to be enlightened about business and why businesses exist and who they serve. And so it's a slow moving process. But when I look now, 10 years later, there are people who have job titles that didn't exist 10 years ago. And so I say, bravo, let's keep going. And the measure of success is progress. And it's going to take time and there are going to be setbacks because progress isn't linear. I want to celebrate the fact that there are multiple people who are DEOs and design leaders with all different job descriptions and all different titles at the top of many organizations. So, and your company, your organization are creating the next leaders out there, right? So keep going.
Thank you. And we do feel very passionate about it. And I feel like this is why we very much connected to your mission, because I 100% agree with you. Designers are here to come up with more inspiring solutions to the problems and challenges that the world face. Designers are here to inspire hope and see and show the better future to the world. So designers have so much to offer to this world. Designers in a broader sense, the creatives, the people with imagination, people who want to create change. So this is definitely that there's never been better time for designers and creatives than now. And you're right, there is a progress being made, but it's not going to happen overnight. So let's be part of this progress and continue the change. And you already mentioned that the DO is a very special, a design leader, design executive is a very special mindset and a title. And I think you once described this as a kind of a cocktail of imagination and metrics.
Yes.
So if you had to make this cocktail of lots of different skills and features and everything that this DO has to have, what would go into this cocktail?
Oh boy, the absolute number one quality and skill that is needed in today's world is empathy and compassion. If we had more and more people who have empathy and compassion and can really accept the diversity of thought and the way people show up in the world, embrace that as a design problem that needs to be considered, I think the world will be a better, kinder place. And that is especially needed more and more as you move up the ladder as you become more and more successful in businesses and organizations, it's much harder to tap into compassion and empathy, right? Because the pressures of looking at the numbers and speaking the language of business or engineering or HR, whatever is up there, sometimes we get further and further away from the people we actually are trying to benefit and serve. So as a leader, that is the number one trait to always hold, which is to be people-centered. And it's not just your customers. It's the people you work with. It's the people that you report to. It's the people that are your peers. And it's the people that report to you. I want to say that's the number one skill to start with.
Sorry, what else
Okay.
would we need to create this perfect cocktail? So number one skill for design leader or approach is empathy and human approach.
Well,
What else?
so the other skills that I call the DEO superpowers is being an agent for change. Change is inevitable, right? And being able to lean into change and treat it like a design ingredient. Risk taking, really knowing how to use risk as an ingredient. What's a smart risk versus a dumb risk, right? And so learning to play with risk and understanding it, using your intuition. So oftentimes we tend to fall back on numbers and metrics. And I always say that metrics are really important. They can tell you the what, but they can't tell you the why. Intuition is a part of being a good leader. Systems thinking, incredibly important right now, right? And this is a problem that happens in corporate America in silos, where we get so fixated on being successful within the confines of our box. We don't often spend enough time to understand the impact of our decisions, design decisions, on the entire system, which is where we have gotten into a lot of trouble in the past. People-centeredness, and then finally getting shit done. Like, part of being a designer means that you actually get out of the thinking mode and actually do something and try it and iterate and experiment and fail. And that's all part of getting shit done. So those are the qualities. That's the full cocktail of design leadership skills and traits that are needed for today's leaders.
Sounds like a good cocktail, but it's also a lot, and it kind of showcases how difficult it is a role of a design leader, and any leader, to be honest, but especially a design leader, combining, as you said, very analytical and business things that you have to be aware of with true empathy and true care for people that you
Right.
work with. So what would you say is the main activity of a design leader? We actually had an interesting question submitted by Daryl. What do you see as the main day-to-day activity that design leaders need to do? So when you have so much on your plate, it's difficult to actually focus on what, as you said, what actually you need to do. So
Yeah.
what would you say as a
Yeah.
day-to-day you need to focus on?
Well, you definitely have to hold all the qualities that I spoke about, right? You hold those. That is part of our sort of our ethos, the way we show up in the world. These are the things we hold. And then what do designers have to do? When you're at a leadership level, oftentimes when you're starting out, you have a very narrow focus of the work, the scope of the work, right? And your job is to like execute that task to the best of your ability. But as you move up the ladder, your skill sets change. Your responsibilities change. Suddenly it's less about you working on a team, then it's more about you perhaps managing and motivating a team, still trying to ship a product or service, right? But then as you move up to there, you move out of solving being assigned a product or a service to maybe multiple products or services, or sort of a portfolio of things. Suddenly your scope gets a lot wider. So suddenly you're starting to have to work across organizations. And then when you move up even further, you're no longer working on specific products and services. The DEO is really responsible for culture change at scale. So as you move up, your leadership, and I'm going to say leadership still exists at the very bottom, your leadership responsibilities change. So the higher you move up, the more across the company you have to work. So as a leader, you have to be still looking vertically, right? Because that's how organizations are organized. But you have to start looking more broadly across the company so that your experiences are seamless. So I hope I answered your question in that there's the doing the work and shipping the work. But as you get higher up, you have to think more broadly and you're more involved with activating and motivating people than you are around shipping products.
I couldn't agree more with you, and I think about it actually a lot in terms of what, especially in the future when we will have more and more technologies to speed up a lot of processes. So one thing that we will still have to be aware of and do manually is being this connector of different humans and different things in a company that are not obvious, and you have to connect the dots and connect unconnectable things. And that's a very, very interesting and exciting and creative job that might not see very designy, but actually has so many design elements of curiosity and kind of coming up with solutions and
Yeah.
research and
Well,
empathy and everything else.
oftentimes people try to ask me to define design, right? And sometimes I have a good answer and sometimes I don't. But what I'd like to remind people that is sometimes we get so hung up on the thing that we're designing. But design is not just the noun, right? Design is the verb, the act of design, right? That's where design thinking comes in, or strategy, or however you want to define whatever that verb is. But it's the activity of doing design. And then there's the mindset of design. Mindset of design is embodying what it means to be an experienced designer, which is when you embody the mindset, you can apply those skills to anything, which is what inspired me to write Change Makers. When I became VP of design at Autodesk, I was responsible for like 400, even though I wasn't responsible for shipping every product and service, I was responsible for the health and well-being of 400 designers plus worldwide. And I still had to show progress on getting specific projects out the door, right? But when I was at this level, I felt like I was having to pick up new skills, which are much more people oriented skills. And I was learning on the job. When I left Autodesk and I had that moment of reflection about what did I do up there as I was learning on the job, this is sort of connected to the DEO. I realized that there are more and more people who are going to be in these VP roles that are learning on the job and realizing that the things that they already they knew about at the lower level either changed or were in a different context. And that's when I got curious and I started interviewing other people in that position, which became change makers, right? So it's super important to recognize, and I really want to inspire people on this call and in the internet and the interwebs, is when you think like a designer, when you embody the mindset of design, you could treat anything in life like a design problem. You could treat anything, you could apply anything like a design problem, solvable through imagination and metrics. And I did want to share this. I was telling you this before we started, and I kind of want to share this with the audience because most recently, my mother passed away. She actually passed away about a month ago. And while she was dying, and maybe shortly after she was dying, I was filled with grief. I was just sort of out of my skin and trying to process it all and make sense of what is happening or what's to come. And I think when she died, my good friend and colleague, Nathan Shedroff, who's written a lot of books and is a design leader in his own right, was texting me. And I think I said, well, she's passed away and now I have to deal with, this funeral and memorial services. And he said, well, you are an experienced designer. You make this the best experience that you can do to honor her memory. And it's sticking with me. But it's a perfect example of the fact that I totally designed my mother's memorial service the way she would have wanted it. And it was spectacular celebration of life. And it was spectacular because I, as a designer, paid attention to every single detail. I didn't like the funeral cards. I designed them myself. I didn't like the video tribute. I did it myself, right? You know, we didn't want like funeral flowers. We hired a florist and said, here's her qualities, make bouquets, emanate her spirit. I did the hand lettered all the labels because I'm a calligrapher and I care about typography, right? So no matter what you do in life, you are going to employ these qualities these superpowers that we have to anything in life. And that's what gives me hope. These qualities don't go away. Yeah, there are layoffs. Yeah, the economy sucks. There are great times when the economy is great. There are times when the economy sucks. There are times when people hire designers. There are times when people fire designers. I've seen it all. I've seen it come and go, right? We have to roll with the changes and we have to lean into the things that we have control over. And what we have control over is ourselves and our talents and our skills. And those talents and skills are evergreen and they can be applied to anything that comes at us in life. And that's what gives me hope and joy in the world. That's so fucked up right now.
Thank you for sharing story. And you know how much I admire you, but how you see the world through the perspective of design, no matter what the world throws at you, is just incredibly inspiring and empowering. Seeing you talk about this very, very openly and finding creativity in any process, I feel like it is such a superpower, and it only shows the reason why you became so successful as a design leader, as a founder, as a creative person is because you see exactly the world exactly like that through the lens of creativity, imagination, problem solving, and no matter what happens in the world. So thank you for sharing this. This is so inspiring and empowering. I want to talk a little bit more about those hard feelings as we all have in our life as creatives and as leaders. As you said, life throws a lot at us, and if you are in a leadership position, forget even the personal parts of our lives, but just in a day-to-day leadership, anything can be thrown at you, and you've seen it also, all flavors of it, from being in stressful situation, whether it is being a VP of design, whether it is being fired as a VP of design, whether it is growing your company, a hot studio, through ups and downs of the economy, or whether it is selling your company and negotiating a deal with Mark Zuckerberg. Probably not the easiest person to negotiate with. So I don't know how you actually hold your nerves there. Would love to hear a bit more of your perspective now on how any mechanisms that you saw working when life is hard, the work is hard, there is a very stressful situation thrown at you, and you need to make a decision with no obvious good answer. So you don't really know how to deal with it. So how do you go about it? And anything that you could share with anyone who's going through this?
Great question. Boy, that's a meaty one. Again, it's like leaning into your creativity. So, this is why I went into coaching actually, because these are the types of questions that I want to help people answer because they're so personal, right? How people respond to change is personal and unique to that person, right? So, some people, when they're confronted with a hard decision, they're going to react differently. One might just use their heart and have an emotional reaction and go with their emotions, right? They might react based on what their heart is telling them. And a decision will be made that's coming directly from her heart. A person might be just stuck in their head where a decision is being made and they are ruminating and ruminating and ruminating and trying to put logic on things. And they've got to a point where they've applied all the logic and they still have to make a decision that is not going to be like ideal, right? So that's another way people respond to change. And some people have gut instincts. They use their body, they use their belly, and they just intuit and they make a decision without having all the facts to the case, which is what makes change so hard, right? Because we have these three centers in our body, and people will lean into one of those three to make those decisions. And they might not be, if you asked all three for an answer, chances are you're going to get a different outcome, right? So one of the things I ask people, one of the things I coach people when they are confronted with that kind of decision that they have to make is I actually ask them to consult their internal board of directors. So I say, okay, so if your head wasn't in charge, what would it tell you? If your heart was in charge, what would it tell you? If your belly, your instincts were in charge, what would it tell you? And it's almost like sitting at the board and asking these parts of us to give us their answers. And that affords us more of a well-rounded way of looking at solving a problem, because you're basically having these parts debate openly about what would be the best course of action.
So how do you make a decision at the end of it?
Well,
If all three saying different things?
it's like being on a board. At the end of the day, you have to listen to all the voices in the room, and then you have to say, is one a dominant? Or is it a mix? Do I have to bring my head and my heart in that and make a decision, right? So sometimes you just have to like really look at, you have to get in any kind of decision, context and content are your friends, and incredible self-awareness. Like, what is the impact of this decision on the people that I care about? And you might get an answer, which is, this decision is really going to hurt people I care about, but it has to happen because of this reason, right? I'm going to give you a good and more of a nuanced example. Okay, so you know, there were a bunch of design layoffs. Was it a year ago, 2 years ago? I lost track of time. There was this like wave after COVID. It was like this flush of designers during COVID. And then suddenly COVID was over and everybody was getting laid off. It was it was horrible. I've seen it before, but that was the wave. And there were tons of companies doing layoffs very, very differently. Some were with compassion and some were just horrible. Airbnb, Twitter, both had to lay off people. They did it in entirely different ways. But so Elon Musk totally, well, you know, he has no heart or soul, I think. But so he totally used his head and looked at the numbers. He didn't give a shit about the people, even if they were talented, right? And that happens a lot in corporate America, right? Now, Brian Chesky, a DEO, he was a CEO, went to RISD. He's a designer, he's a DEO. He announced that there were going to be layoffs, and then he published the names of all the people who were laid off to help them get other jobs. Like, he tried to manage that horrible decision in the most compassionate way possible. So that to me is an example of somebody using their heart and their head to solve the problem. Both things had to happen, different ways of executing. And
I
so,
love that you
yeah,
give this example. I just, sorry to interrupt, because I think this is, again, going back to what you were saying earlier about creative problem solving. This is, both problem were solved, I suppose.
yeah,
One with a bit of imagination and creativity, compassion and empathy, and another with none of this. So yeah,
yes.
it's
And I'll give you an example from my own playbook. So when I was running Hot Studio, we had downturns. We had like 3 horrible downturns. I had Hot Studio from 1997 to 2013. There was some really bad times in there. Great times, but there were bad times where like 2008, when every company was laying off people. And I had done layoffs in 2000 when my company was just small. I was like 20 people and I had to lay off 5 people, and it crushed me. It was the first time I had to do that, right? And it hurt like hell. And then here's 2008, and I'm seeing it coming. I'm seeing that the money that is coming in is less than the money that is going out, and I have to make really calculated decisions. And so what did I do? I was transparent with my employees. I'm like, here's what's coming in, here's what the costs are going out. I don't want to lay off any of you. We worked really hard to get the most special, talented people, in the Bay Area to come, and in New York, to work at Hot Studio, which is why Facebook acquired us. We had the best talented people, diversity of people at Hot Studio. Worked really hard to gain their trust so that they would work at Hot Studio on our projects. I didn't want to lay off those talent people. So I was like, I put the problem out to the team, to Hot Studio, and I was like, okay, let's think of ways to reduce 20% of our costs. Most of this is people cost. We've cut out all the perks, and now we have to shave X number of dollars so we can stay alive. And I'm like, if some of you want to take a sabbatical, that long trip, go take it now. And we'll cover your health insurance. But if you want to go travel for 6 months, it's probably a good time to do that. And we're going to give you that, right? Some of you have families and you can't work. You have to keep your jobs intact. But some of you can work 3 or 4 days a week so that the people who have to work 5 days a week can do it. So how as a collective can we be creative to get the people costs back down so that we don't have to lay people off? And I also said, if any of you aren't happy at Hot Studio, now's a good time to leave. No, we're not gonna feel bad. If you don't want to stay, this is a really good time for you to go. And we were able to manage our costs as a collective company so that we didn't have to lay anybody off. And that's an example of DEO creativity. That's an example of using compassion and empathy first to solve a problem that is not typical. That's what Airbnb did. They had their own version of creativity.
I love the examples they're giving. And I actually, going back to Airbnb, I remember when they published that list, I was going through it as well, because I was like, they had like 5 rounds of interview for each person. Of course, I'm going to select from this list. This is just a brilliant list of people. It's again, how them doing that thinking benefits everyone. And again, it happens in the industry. There is nothing new. It will happen again one day. And it's just, yeah, how can you be the most human about it is the question for every leader. And I love the example that you gave. Talking about the mixed emotions that a leader and a designer has to face every day. Another one that I suppose a lot of people in senior position face is the constant anxiety and stress and everything that comes with it. Whether it is from the fact that you can see something coming and you just kind of holding yourself with that emotion and just slightly scared maybe of how it will go, or is it because you have too much on and you try to hold all these pieces together and you just feel like that's a lot, I'm gonna crush? All these difficult feelings, how did you find out, especially now that you coach lots of different leaders, did you find any way to find the balance between this kind of constant anxiety of what can go wrong, what is going wrong,
Yeah.
balanced with motivation and inspiration and creativity that you need in your day-to-day
Yeah.
job to be a good leader?
Another great question. And I mean, and that's a big part of stress. A big part of leadership is that more responsibility, more fears, more worries. One of the things I work with my clients on is their saboteur voices. It's the voice in our heads that we have that are constantly feeding us really negative messages that might be about, like, they might say I'm not good enough, or I'm fucking up, or it's my fault, or I made that wrong decision, and I'm not enough. I'm not doing enough. All of the especially I'm not doing enough when you're a leader, because you're constantly feeling like there's so many things that you can't possibly get to everything, right? Which is why prioritization is important. But that's another. But you can only prioritize when you're dealing with your healthy part of the brain, the part of brain that's connected to love and compassion, not the part of our brain that's connected to fear. So one of the things I coach people on is self-awareness. Which part am I listening to? Am I listening the fear part, or am I listening to the part that's about love and creativity? And it's hard to say, oh, well, then don't listen to that part and listen to the creative part. No, because you have all of this like negativity, and it's connected to oftentimes things that have happened to us in the past, in particularly our childhood. A lot of times when we get triggered, it's connected to something that happened to us as a child. And that's why it's so acute and painful sometimes, right? So I work with people to help them understand which part of them are they listening to, and why are they listening to this part that's causing stress and anxiety. A little tactic I do is, all right, what's a fact versus a story? Oftentimes, it's the stories that we are telling ourselves, which aren't true. They're either stories that are predicting the future or reliving the past. They're not really about being in the present moment. What's the story you're hearing, but what are the facts? Because when you look at the facts of the case, it's going to be like two or three things. The fact might be, I woke up late, I went to work late, I opened my laptop. The story might be, oh God, everybody saw me coming into the office in that meeting really late. My boss is really, really mad at me. I'm going to get fired tomorrow. It's like the scenario of walking into a room late in the middle of a meeting. What is a fact? What is a story? Right? And if it's a story, the opposite could be true, because it's a story. It could have been I walked in late, everybody was happy to see me. They were really, and they just carried on. You know, it could have been, right? The same thing could be equally true, because it's not a fact. So that's one way I help manage people a little bit, for them to get really present, because when we try to relitigate the past, or that we're trying to predict the future, it can cause us a lot of anxiety.
I love what you shared just now, and I can so relate to this. And I do feel that is even more common in creatives and designers, for the reason that you said earlier. Our role is to be empathic, our role is to
Yes.
feel
Right.
other humans around us. So we very naturally project all of these things of what this person thought, what this person felt. If I do this, how this person will react, because we do want to empathize with everyone in the room. But then when you have a lot of people in your team or in your company, and you try to empathize with every single one, to the detriment of any decision making or your own day-to-day life, you realize that you're not really helping anyone through this
Yeah.
thinking process. You're just trying to predict someone else's emotion
Yes.
or thought. Well, none of it might be true. As you said, it's just the
Yes.
story that you're saying, but the reality
Yeah.
is very different.
There's one thing I wanted to add. So what happens if you are in that room and you're feeling scared, right? Or somebody was confrontational with you. And I do recall a time when I was at Autodesk, and my job was to present the success, what's happening on my team. Okay. And it was on the agenda. This is what Maria is going to present. Right. And so I prepared my deck. I was ready. I practiced. I had my time. Right. But there were some people in the room that really had a different agenda. There was something that I was doing that was threatening them. So they would show down. Now they could show up very differently. They could be reactive, they could be withdrawn, they can be using their competence to hurt me by asking really mean questions, right? In the book, we call this the piñata party. When you go into a conference room and suddenly you're getting attacked and you're not prepared for that. So what happens when that happens? How do you react? And this happens a lot it does happen a lot to design leaders, right? Because a lot of people in positions of power can be threatened by our superpowers, right? Or our success can be very threatening to other people because they might be afraid that you're taking power away from them. This happens a lot the higher up you are, right? People get threatened by your own power. So a couple of things. First of all, self-awareness. Like, oh, I am getting attacked. Now I could get defensive and try to fight, which was my modus operandi. But when you are defensive and you try to fight back, if people are already threatened by you, they don't give a shit. Any data that you might like throw at them. This is very typical with design researchers. Design researchers have all the data in the world to say, this is going to help a company or a customer. And yet somebody in power is like, bullshit, I don't believe it, right? Right. But I have the data. Doesn't matter. They already in their mind don't care. Right. So it's the same sort of thing. Like I could get defensive, but that person won't care. That person will probably get more aggressive. That was my natural response. It didn't go well for me. But what I learned later is, because it happened again, I instead absorb. I take a deep breath inside. Breaths are very important. Breathing is good. Breathing calms your parasympathetic nervous system. So if you can manage to get a couple of breaths in and reset internally, get curious. Whenever you feel threatened or stressed, our best weapon is to ask good questions. And curiosity moves us away from that threat response into that creative response. Because when you're curious and you're asking questions, it's a generative kind of energy. So it's like, okay, obviously you don't agree with me. Share with me why, but not like, fuck you, share with me. It's more like, yeah, I'm really curious why this doesn't resonate with you. Can you share more information? Or who else can I talk to get more information? Or let me rethink this and I'll get back to you. But I really appreciate the fact that you're sharing this with me openly. So that moves us into a position of power. So when you feel threatened, if you can't escape the room, because that's the first thing I would do is run away and go get a drink or go to the beach. For me, if I could stare at the ocean, it calms me down, but alcohol also helps. But if I can't do that, I'm going to go and ask curious questions. So I'm just sharing another little nugget for everybody who finds themselves in those situations.
Thank you for sharing this, Nugget. And again, this is such a creative and designer approach to any sort of stressful situation. It is, as with anything with design, it's about curiosity, it's about finding answers, it's about digging deeper into the problem to understand why something is happening. And I can so relate to what you're saying about these stressful situations when someone attacks you, or maybe they don't even attack you, they provide feedback, but it always feels inside as an attack because, of course, you care about something so deeply, whether it is their project or what you're working on, and someone gives you an opinion that is very different from what you have in your head, and it does feel incredibly painful. And I've been in many of those situations, and when I look back at them, I realize how much I learned from each of them, how actually improved something I was working on or doing, or it gave me a new perspective that I haven't had before. But in the moment doesn't help. You just feel so painful. And the only, I suppose, thing that I've learned that the more you go through it, the easier it gets.
I don't know. I'm like 60 years old and I still don't like feedback.
At least you know that it's feedback. I think
I need feedback and it's a way of life, but I wouldn't say I enjoy it. I want to continue to be blissfully ignorant. That's what I want to do.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's I don't think anyone can disagree that hearing nice things about you is much more pleasant than hearing not so nice things about yourself. So
but you're right. You will learn from your feedback. So like Christopher is a woman. She also co-wrote Changemakers with me. And we teach a class at Stanford. It's actually an online class. So if anybody interweb in different countries want to sign up, it's Stanford Continuous Studies. It's a 2-day, well, it's 6-week class on just on our book on change making. And, so every time we teach the class, you get a performance review, right? You get feedback. I never read them. I tell Christopher to just share with me the cliff notes.
Well, that's a good way to actually separate your emotional and kind of the productive logical part. I think that's very smart, because
No,
that way
we all should read the feedback. We should all do it. So even though I do it, I am not recommending that you do it, because feedback, like you said, is a way of learning. But I'm just sharing with you that no matter how old I am, I struggle with getting negative feedback, because it activates that story part of my brain that's saying my childhood trauma, which is, you're never enough. You didn't do a good enough job. You missed X, Y, and Z. So I have that part of me that I call Satan shows up, and I have to keep it at bay. I have to work on it. It's a work in progress. I'm still a work in progress.
I have to say, it's very reassuring, though, to hear that first of all, it's normal and everyone feels it. But also, if you feel it, Maria, I feel so much better. Seriously, I feel like it's not that bad in the world. So thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
But going back to actually talking a little bit about the very special environment that you managed to create wherever you go, and that was especially famous at Hot Studio, where the culture of Hot Studio has been known for this very much creative problem solving, and the examples that you give, obviously share how ingrained it was in any decision making. So I'd love to talk a little bit about your story of Hot Studio and everything that you had to implement in it, create within to make it a success. As far as I know from the story, it was first started as a freelance kind of, and then you had more and more projects, more and more clients, it started growing organically. So at which point, I suppose, or what were those turning points within the studio that you're like, okay, now I need to change something. I can't operate like I had before, which is just few freelancers doing projects together. Yeah. So what were those milestones within the agency?
Yeah. And in any milestone, it's like scale, right? So when you are starting out, I didn't go to business school. I got a degree in fine art. I didn't know how to run a business. But I used my design skills to figure it out along the way. And any kind of gaps in knowledge that I had, I would bring in people who complemented my strengths. If I still to this day can't do calculations in Excel. So I rely on experts to do those things, to give me the right information so I can make good decisions. So, as a leader, it's always important to know where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. And as you grow, you're going to bring in people to supplement and those areas of expertise that you might be lacking. Then with Hot Studio, it started out as me. And then I had 2 or 3 employees. I think they were freelancers for a year before I had the courage to actually make them employees. It starts out where you have a company of contractors because you're too terrified to make them employees. So the first step is a company of contractors. Then it comes to a point where it's kind of illegal to have contractors around, at work. And so there becomes a point where it's no longer legal to do that. You have to put on the big boy pants and start getting employees, which means then you have to get HR. You have to get somebody who's going to handle health insurance and payroll and all that. So then suddenly your company gets a little bit bigger, right? Because you need all the operational stuff. So first it was contractors were all doing everything. There's very low risk. Then there's between 5 and 10 people, and you're going to start needing payroll and HR. So there's more operational structure that's in place, which means there's more overhead, which means that you're going to need sales. So then it goes from 15 to 20, which is a lovely size to be, because when you're 15 and 20, you kind of have all the things in place, all the special roles in place, but you're 15 to 20, so you can only work on a few projects at a time. And probably your scope on a project is narrow if you're working with clients, which means the impact that you're going to have is going to be narrow. So that's the risk reward about being 15, 20. You can be really flexible. You're not taking on a lot of financial risk, but the impact that you have is going to be smaller. Then there's 25 to 30. That's also a nice size number, but you're starting to have to really bring in, like, you have to really be paying attention to the money going in, money going out. That's another size. And then when you're 50 to 80, that's another kind of milestone where you actually have to start thinking about, probably you have to start thinking about junior design, junior, senior, like leveling, and career ladders happen after 50 people, and growth paths, and company maturity. And then once you're past 100, then it's sort of like a hamster wheel, machine. And I always encourage people, success isn't really about the number of employees you have. It's really down to, what do you want to accomplish? And the reason why Hot Studio got to be as big as it did is because we wanted to have more impact, but we also wanted it to be truly multidisciplinary. We just didn't want to be responsible for the design part, which meant that we had to bring in research and strategy and design and UX and engineering and PMs and product managers. So when you have those roles, you have to be able, when you're full delivery, you have to be 80 to 100. So what do you want to accomplish? That's always the first step in understanding what you want out of your company. What do you want to accomplish? And then what do you need to accomplish it? And then you figure out what the number should be.
I'm glad you mentioned that number doesn't matter, because I think this is a very common misconception in a creative industry, but also in lots of startups, in terms of measuring the wrong thing,
Right.
not the what you're trying to do, but how you look, what kind
Yeah.
of office you have, and all the other things.
It's the story again, right? But just because you have more employees, it means you have more risk. Doesn't mean that you're going to have a better product. It doesn't even mean you're going to make more money. I don't think I made more money because I had 80 employees.
Uh,
I fed a lot more mouths.
yeah, and you're right, and it's a bigger risk, it's a bigger cost, and it's it's something that kind of grows in your mind. But also you had a comparison from that to then being part of Facebook, which is a massive scale. And you talked a lot about how your role shifted there, how you needed to learn how to collaborate more rather than kind of being at the leadership position and lead the teams. What I would love to hear as well is, now that you reflect back at the growth of Hut Studio, after you've been in huge corporations, what would you've done differently to make either the growth easier, or maybe something from operational side? Was there something you learned by being in these huge companies that you would have applied in your smaller context?
When you ask the question, agency versus company, I always say both, because you gain there's enormous amount of learning on both ends. So if you are starting out in your career, dabble. Don't just get in the corporate machinery and feel like you're moving up, because you know what? There's no such thing as job security in corporate America. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to move up. It means you might move lateral, or you might be a trampolining, it's bullshit, right? So try to get as much, think about your career as steps for learning and getting context. Because on the agency side, I learned how to ship, and I learned how to deliver fast, right? Because in the agency world, you have a deadline, you have to make profit, you have to have milestones, right? There's more of a actual deadlines are more important in the agency world than they are in the product world, where shipping always slips, right? So I was really good at understanding how to get shit done, you know, on the agency side. And also on the agency side, I did get to flex my creativity, because when you're in an agency, you're getting paid to dream. They're hiring you to dream and go wide and wild, right? So I had that part of my brain. When I got to corporate America, even though it was harder for me because I was somebody who didn't want to be in a box. And I said, just don't put me in a box. And then Facebook, they're like, are you kidding? You're getting put in a box, Maria. And that was hard for me, but I learned a lot. Even though it was hard, I had a lot of learnings from it. And one of the things that I learned in corporate America was actually really soup to nuts to actually get a product out in the world and actually see it out in the world and measure its impact and iterate, and using data science as a design tool to understand people's behaviors, like getting feedback in real time to build a product over a period of time, is also an incredible learning experience. And I learned a little bit about politics, like working inside the belly of the beast and what it means to, punch up and pitch to Mark Zuckerberg, which was fucking scary, scary moment, right? So there's a lot of learning there as well. Even when I got to Autodesk and I found myself out of a job, because the CEO decided to change, and the new CEO didn't want design leaders at that level. And that was very traumatizing. But I learned so much because it led to doing change makers, because I got to ask the question, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What do others need to know so that they don't make the same mistakes? So everything you do in life, they're going to be, as the happy times and the really horrible, painful times, there's learning in everything you do. And you bring that in, and it gives you all of that wisdom that you can then impart on others.
This is amazing. And I love how you obviously approach everything as a learning experience, with curiosity and empathy, as you always do. But also, I like how you think about it as the skills that you can then share with the world, and kind of, now that you coach, you can have an ability to reflect on both sides. One thing that you mentioned there that I want to dive deeper in: pitching to Mark Zuckerberg and the politics of big corporations. I always hated politics of big companies. That's something that I realized I cannot deal with. And I know you're very similar in that sense. But there is also the art to it, and there are people who are really good at it, who really understand how to navigate it. Were there any things that you've learned that you felt like were maybe nuggets of wisdom you
Yeah,
could share?
you're right. Some people are really good at it, right? And some people aren't. And that there's no right and wrong here, right? So recognizing, going back to what your strengths are, what are your natural strengths that you want to lean into, and what are the things that, recognizing your weaknesses and making a choice. Is this something I need to learn more and I need to actually get better at, or is it something that I'm never going to really enjoy, so therefore I'm never going to be great at it? That maybe that's not something I need to do. You have it goes to self-awareness, right? So for me, I learned a lot in terms of politics. And so I did, and I worked the politics, but I also know now I fucking hate it. And it doesn't give me energy. I'm short circuiting this for a minute, but when I left Autodesk, I started getting nervous and started going on VP interviews. All the big guys, right? All the VP companies, I went on VP interviews. And because I was afraid, not because I made money. I don't need money. So, but that wasn't it. I was afraid that people were going to forget me. I was the fear base, the Satan side. You're going to get forgotten. You got to get another VP job. You got to stay relevant. You got to stay, you got to be out there, right? So So that's what was motivating me to get the VP job. But when I was going on the interviews, I had this real realization that I don't really want to be in corporate America anymore, right? But my fear guy was saying, go, 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 go. But then I had to come to Jesus moment and said, you hate this. Why are you doing this? And that's when I stopped and went into coaching. But it's an example of I'm not good at the politics. I'm never going to be good at the politics. Maybe there's a different path for me. But there are people who are great at the politics and I admire them. They're still at Facebook or they're CEOs of other companies. And they worked with Mark Zuckerberg beautifully and they're successful in their own right. And just because they're successful and they're the VP and they're CEOs and they're still at Facebook at the top of the thing, that doesn't mean that my path is any less successful. My path to go to coaching and actually work with people one-on-one is exactly where I need to be successful in my own right. And that took a lot of self-awareness to get to that place. When it comes to corporate politics, if that is something that you feel like you need to be better at, and it's not life's soul sucking like it was for me, then find mentors who can help you be better at it. That's the best way to do it.
That's a really good advice. And it is like living in a micro universe when you're in a big corporation where you have to basically network within the
Yes.
company
Yeah.
to find the right people and to be mentored by certain people or sponsored by certain people or get insight from certain people that will help you navigate this very, very, very difficult environment. So thank you for sharing this. I wanted to talk about something else. And continue the conversation about pitching to the C-level and specifically within the context of Facebook. I felt like it was such a unique situation when you were there for two reasons. First, you were a founder, entrepreneur who became an employee. That's, I suppose, psychologically very different and weird situation to be in.
Yeah.
Second, everyone was much younger than you. It was tech industry. Mark Zuckerberg was in his 20s. And
I was 50.
wow, that must have been just weird.
It
And
was.
then also, as you said, you don't necessarily enjoy this kind of corporate approach in politics. So that's, I suppose, an extreme version of what a lot of creatives face in a corporate environment. They want to pitch an idea, they want to be heard, they want the C-level to understand what they're coming from and the vision they're bringing, but it's very hard. What would you advise someone who is in that position, who want to be heard, who want to be more successful and bring design up within the organization? Maybe what are the things they might need to think about to make it successful?
Yeah, right. Some of the mistakes that people make as well. First of all, always find your tribe. First of all, when you're in systems like that, you're going to find people who are going to welcome your way of thinking. They might be people that report to you. They might not be people in different parts of the org. There might be people in a way different vertical like finance or HR or marketing, right? So find people who are like you, who want the same things, and start building allies and alliances for those people that share your beliefs and support them and have them support you. That's like the first thing is like, how do you build supporters? Then the other thing this is in the book, but I talk about the importance of listening, right? Doing a listening tour. We do such a great job being advocates for our customers. We do a pretty shitty job applying that same empathy skills to the coworkers that we believe in, that the coworkers that we work with, especially people that we don't believe in. Right? So they're going to be supporters and they're going to be resistors of your mission. And in the book, there's actually 3 profiles of people rather than org chart, there's three types of people in companies: leapers, bridge builders, and tradition holders. The leapers are those people who are supporters of your mission. These are people who are going to be love to start projects, are going to be highly enthusiastic. They might be social connectors. They're enthusiastic. You want to a lot build alliances with them. The bridge builders are people in the organizations that might support your mission, but they might not. So these are people who, in order for you to gain their trust, you need to prove it. You need to provide data. You need to show and lead by example. You need to show success in small wins. So these are people who will support you, but they need to feel confident that you're doing the right things for the right reasons and that it's going to benefit them. There's a lot of those people in companies. Then the tradition holders are people in companies who are going to be the most resistant to you. And this is especially true as design leaders in corporate America, because tradition holders, these are people who want to preserve the old way of doing things, which is the absolute antithesis of what design leaders want, which is to change and break things, right? Tradition holders don't want things to change at all. They've seen people come and go. They will either be openly against you or they'll be working against you silently behind the scenes, and they may never support what you want to do. The big mistake that we make is we tend to ignore those people because we feel like they're never going to want to be on board with us, so why bother? That's your downfall. So when you go into a company and you spend time by not pushing design or your ideas, take the time to really understand the landscape that you're working in, the system that you're working in. Do a stakeholder map. Identify the people in your orbits that are going to help you, are going to have an impact on your success. And they don't have to be in your direct org. They can be outside your org. But do your stakeholder mapping. Then, through listening and interviewing, are they going to be leapers? Are they going to be bridge builders? Are they going to be tradition holders? Figure out what strategies you need to employ to build support. And for those tradition holders, the best thing you can do is lean into their wisdom and expertise and find out why they're so scared of change. And the best way to gain support by tradition holders is to make them successful and support their mission any way you possibly can and bestow credit onto them. Anyway, even if you did it, let them have the credit, because what you're going to gain is a potential ally. They might screw you and stab you in the back because they're going to be people who are never going to agree, and they're always going to be afraid of you. And if that's the case, be kind, be empathetic, recognize that they're scared, and watch your back.
Great advice. And I love how you think of this very structurally. It actually reminds me of a conversation we had with Callan Thompson, who is a VP of Design at Hatspace, VP of Design and Research, curates one of our courses on product design strategy. And we talked a lot about how designers can be more strategic. And one thing that they said about it is that the role of a designer is being facilitator. Same as you facilitate a workshop, and you might to consider different factors like, is the room feeling a bit sleepy because they are after lunch and therefore then you need to inject more energy? Or as you said, there are different profiles of people in the room when you facilitate a workshop. Some are naysayers, some are very enthusiastic, some need more data. So when you facilitate the workshop, you kind of consider how you incorporate all of these different factors within whether it's a brainstorm session or maybe it's a customer journey mapping or whatever you're doing. The same way within your organization, you facilitate this kind of a year-long workshop, a few year-long workshop where you have to consider these different energy levels within the organization through different periods, or whether it is different types of characters that kind of part of this year-long workshop that you're doing within the organization. So I love how you talk about this kind of identifying who's who, so you can map it out and understand how to work with each of them, because this is very helpful when yeah, it's very uncertain when you try to make change, how to even approach it.
I mean, it really is about people dynamic, building trust and relationships. And there are going to be situations where they're never going to be on board with what you're doing, but pay attention to what they're doing, and don't, but because they could be your downfall. But this is a way you navigate politics, right? You navigate politics by understanding the people dynamics.
Very true. We have actually a question connected to that from Gauri. What have been your three most effective methods in building trust and relationships with senior cross-functional leadership in a relevant, compassionate, and empathic way?
Yeah, the first thing is seeing them and taking time to really understand and learn what gets them excited, what they need to be successful, and what is making them afraid. One of the most successful things I did at Autodesk is I became really close with the people in orgs that were kind of ignored, right? So like I became very close with people in legal. Yeah, these are the people that have to write those awful like cookie accept all cookie things, or agree all, like these horrible forms that nobody ever signs, and we're signing our life away, right? And compliance, right? And so like I became friends with people in compliance, and then I invited them in to be creative problem solvers, and they're like, really? You're not going to yell at me or be disgusted by the fact that people are going to have to fill out these 10-page forms. And I'm like, no, I know what needs to happen, and maybe you can help us solve it, that is going to be better for people. So how do you bring people into the creative design process? Because again, everybody was born creative. There's creativity in everybody. So rather than siloing design and trying to preserve it and feeling like we're at the table, we have to defend this at all costs, I understand that need, but it ultimately will isolate you. And when design is not the thing, the shiny new object, it can also you could also be replaced. So my the build trust is, first of all, I say the listening tour. Before you hypothesize any kind of solution, and I know that you feel the pressure of having to deliver right away, especially in a company, especially if you're like a new design leader, you feel the pressure that you actually have to solve something within 30 days. Resist that and ask for 90 days of listening, and interview as many people as you can, not just the people in the org chart, not just the people that the boss tells you to interview. Go beyond it. Sit in kitchens. Let people see you as a human being who really cares, that they shouldn't be afraid of. So that's the first thing, is the listening tour, where you are asking them questions and you genuinely care about what is going to make them successful. That's the first thing. The second thing is trying to understand what scares people. What there's another example in the book, Changemakers, called the SCARF model, which came from Dr. David Rock. He's a neurosurgeon. And he says there's like 5 factors that throw people into threat: fear of status, fear of certainty, fear of autonomy, fear of relatedness, and fear of fairness. And depending on the kind of person you are, you're going to get triggered based on any of those factors. What scares people? Are people afraid that you're going to take away their power? Are they afraid that you're going to put uncertainty into the mix? Are they afraid that it's going to remove their autonomy to make decisions? be aware of what scares them and try to employ strategies to help them move out of threat status. That's the other way. And then the third one I would say is celebrate the shit out of success. Celebrate. So also recognize failure and make sure that failure is something that people can be open about and that they can learn from. So I'm a huge fan of retrospectives. Even though I said I don't like feedback, I love retrospectives because I can take feedback that's on a pink post-it note anytime. So make sure that you have celebration rituals and that you have mechanisms to recognize failure as a way of learning. So those would be my top three.
These are brilliant pieces of advice. Thank you for sharing. And I love actually lots of other things that you mentioned as part of this answer that makes me want to dive into one more topic of rituals and things that help to create this culture where whether it's design celebrated or where everyone is just thinks more creatively. Could you give any more examples of other things that you had, as whether it's Hot Studio or anywhere else where you worked, kind of day-to-day principles or rituals or anything else that you implemented that would help foster that environment where people are more creative and free and collaborative?
Well, I think the celebration rituals are always fun. Right? And there's so many different ways to celebrate and not just like how do you celebrate publicly? How do you publicly acknowledge people so that they can be seen? And so one of the things I love to celebrate people who are in positions where they're not in positions of power necessarily. They're always afraid that they're going to lose their job, or they might feel like they can't be leaders because their scope of work is too small, which is bullshit because everybody can be a leader if you embody the qualities. How do you lift those people up? So I was always looking for mechanisms where people can acknowledge work well done. So when I was at Autodesk, I put out a monthly newsletter, pushed it out to everybody in the company. I was called the XD newsletter because I had the authority to push out emails to the entire company. So I used it, right? And so nobody ever stopped me, so I just did it. And so I used those newsletters, and I would reach out to all the different satellite offices, the leapers. I knew the leapers in all the offices, and I'd say, "Hey, tell me who's doing good stuff in Singapore, who's doing stuff in India, who's doing stuff in, I don't know, the Berlin office. Let's acknowledge them and let's celebrate them in the newsletter." So that's one way to do it, right? Awards are always really fun, but you know, find those opportunities to really elevate people, and then you're going to have an ally for life. Now, failure is great because people are so afraid about failure, but if you normalize it then it takes the sting out of it, right? So I think retrospectives all the time, the pink post-it notes, the green post-it notes, the yellow post-it notes, that helps a lot because it almost makes it anonymous in a group when they're on the board like that. And then people can be very proactive and more, they can be in more resolution mode than blame mode. In the book, there's a woman named Christina Woodkey. She's got a bunch of books out. She's a well-known leader. She's worked for a lot of corporations. And when she was in corporate America, she would have a celebration ritual every Friday that she called Fridays Are for Winners. And it was all about failure, sort of like an improv thing. Oops, I
Love it.
failed. Like in improv, they always say failure is part of improv. And, I was never good at improv, but it was all about celebrating failure. What went wrong? Let's talk about it and celebrate it, because now we can figure out how to make it right. Fridays are for winners.
This is beautiful. Thank you so much. I love all the examples that you're sharing. I'm conscious that we are running out of time, and even though I feel like we need to have a 5-hour conversation with you, because I don't think it's even humanly possible to compress all of your stories, your wisdom, your perspective, your knowledge, and your approach to life in any sort of format. So, but I'm grateful at least we had this 1.5 hour together. Before I let you go, I would love to ask you one last question, which we ask all design leaders that we meet. And I would like to ask you it as well, because it's a bit more philosophical.
Mhm.
Maria, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Peace, eradicating stupid wars, and not seeing people for the human beings that they are. That's what I would change. I go
I,
big. I always go
you go
big.
big, you go big, you go big for radical innovation. But I couldn't agree more. I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that we should all be more human. And I don't like, if only we can just create a world where it's peaceful and good for all of us. That would be one thing that we can all dream about. So thank you, Maria, for sharing, and thank you for answering so many difficult questions, and also being so open and honest and so joyful. I can't stop admiring how you just approach your life through so much empathy, curiosity, fun, happiness, that every encounter that we have just gives me so much energy and happiness. So thank you so much, and especially finding time today to talk and being so transparent and honest, and sharing so much practical and wise advice for all of us. So just massive thank you for everything that you do.
It was my pleasure, and pay it forward. That's what I want everybody on this call to take these life experiences that I've had, or the people that whose experience I shared today, and pay it forward, because that's what we need to do, right? As leaders, is we need to constantly be looking at the next generation of leaders who can benefit from the experiences that we've had here. And
Thank you.
thank you for all that you do to make that
Well,
happen.
thank you. And we will have many more chats, and I'm looking forward to seeing you as part of our Design Leaders program in San Francisco in January. So many more great conversation will happen then. So everyone who will be on that program are incredibly lucky they'll meet you in person. But for everyone on this call, thank you for sharing your questions. Thanks for being here until the end. And thank you for staying. And until next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.